The history of New York, from native tribes to the birth of a city. New York City, the most populous city in the United States, stands proudly at the southern tip of New York State, surrounded by one of the world's largest natural harbors. But long before skyscrapers defined its skyline, this land was home to thriving Native American communities whose histories laid the foundation for what would become one of the greatest cities on Earth. When European explorers first arrived, two major groups of Native American peoples lived in the region. Along the Atlantic coast were the Algonquian-speaking Mohican, also known as Mohican, and Munsee tribes. Farther inland lived the powerful Iroquois Confederacy, a remarkable alliance formed between 1570 and 1600 by five tribes: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. The Tuscarora would later join this confederacy in 1722, expanding its influence. The Iroquois Confederacy was more than just a political alliance. It was an advanced society built on shared governance, diplomacy, and collective strength. At its height around the year 1700, it became one of the most influential native powers in North America. The Confederacy's decision to align with the British against the French, who were allied with their traditional rivals, would shape the balance of power in the continent for nearly 150 years. In many ways, the outcome of these struggles helped pave the way for British dominance in northern North America, setting the stage for the later development of New York as a crucial colonial center. The colonial era of New York, from Dutch beginnings to English rule. The story of New York's colonial period begins with the Dutch. After explorer Henry Hudson's 1609 voyage up the river that would later bear his name, the Netherlands laid claim to the region. In 1624, the Dutch established Fort Orange, near present-day Albany, the first permanent European settlement in what would become New York. A year later, they founded New Amsterdam at the southern tip of Manhattan Island. To legitimize their new settlement, Dutch Governor Peter Minuit famously purchased Manhattan from the local indigenous people for goods valued at about 60 Dutch guilders, often said to equal the legendary $24. While this transaction became one of the most iconic moments in early New York history, the Dutch had little interest in building an agricultural colony. Their focus was commerce and trade, not permanent settlement. The Netherlands at that time was already a prosperous nation with social and economic stability. There was little incentive for its citizens to migrate abroad, and few religious or political pressures to push them to the New World. As a result, while Dutch trading posts along the Hudson River thrived, they did not plant deep colonial roots. That changed in 1664, when an English fleet entered New York Harbor. Outnumbered and unsupported, Governor Peter Stuyvesant was forced to surrender. The Dutch government and colonists, lacking the will to fight, ceded control to England. The colony was renamed New York in honor of the Duke of York, who would later become King James II. By 1669, English rule was firmly established. Despite the change in sovereignty, New York's growth remained slow. Like the Dutch before them, the English granted large estates to wealthy individuals instead of encouraging small farms. This system deterred independent settlers who had populated nearby New England colonies, and much of the fertile Hudson Valley remained underdeveloped for decades. During the mid-18th century, the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the larger conflict between France and England, brought renewed turmoil to the region. French forces based along the St. Lawrence River and in Quebec launched raids into northern and central New York. The powerful Iroquois Confederacy, which had long dominated upstate New York, sided with the English, partly because the French had previously aided their rival tribes. These wars made life difficult beyond Albany, but by the Treaty of Paris in 1763, England's dominance in New York was confirmed. With peace restored, settlers from New England began streaming westward, crossing from Connecticut and Massachusetts into the Hudson Valley and beyond. This movement sparked the beginning of New York's first major population boom. By 1698, the colony's population was around 18,000, two-thirds of whom lived in and around New York City. By the eve of the American Revolution, that number had grown to 163,000, a remarkable increase that shifted the balance toward rural expansion. Dutch influence remained strong in both New York City and Albany, while settlers from New England brought their own customs and dialects to the interior. German communities also took root, giving the colony a unique blend of cultures and languages. This diversity caught the attention of the French writer Michel-Guillaume Saint-Jean de Crèvecoeur, better known in America as J. Hector St. John. Writing in 1782, He described the farmers of the lower Hudson Valley and explored the forces shaping what he called the emerging American character. His observations captured a key truth about New York history, that it was a melting pot long before the phrase ever existed. Revolution, statehood, and growth, how New York shaped a nation. Few places in America played as dramatic a role in the nation's birth as New York. The state was home to many of the major battlegrounds of the American Revolution, and the conflict here often resembled a civil war. Nowhere else in the colonies was the population so divided. While some New Yorkers fought fiercely for independence, many others remained loyal to the British Crown. This division tore communities, and even families, apart. After the Revolution, New York quickly emerged as a key player in shaping the young nation's future. Its leaders joined forces with other statesmen to advocate for a strong central government, replacing the weak confederation that had guided the new republic. At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, New York's delegation, especially Alexander Hamilton, played a vital role in crafting the U.S. Constitution. Yet back home, ratification sparked intense political battles. Deep divisions in the state legislature delayed approval, and New York ultimately became the 11th state to ratify the Constitution. The state's first capital was Kingston, established in 1777, but in 1797 it moved permanently to Albany, marking a new era of governance and growth. Though the American Revolution and later the War of 1812 briefly slowed New York's westward expansion, that momentum quickly returned. From Albany, turnpikes stretched westward across the state, carrying settlers and goods toward new opportunities. The real turning point came in 1825 with the opening of the Erie Canal, a monumental engineering feat that transformed transportation and trade. The canal connected the Hudson River to the Great Lakes, linking the Atlantic Ocean with America's western frontier. Overnight, New York became the gateway to the expanding nation. Cities along the canal's route, Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Utica, exploded with growth. Soon, railroads followed, mirroring the trade routes established by the canal and turnpikes, and solidifying New York's dominance as the commercial heart of America. By the 1800 census, New York had the third largest population in the United States, trailing only Virginia and Pennsylvania. Just 10 years later, it surpassed them all to become the most populous state in the Union, a position that symbolized its rise in manufacturing, trade, and transportation. This era also saw an extraordinary mix of cultures. French political scientist Alexis de Tocqueville, while traveling through New York in the 1830s, marveled at its diversity and the vibrant energy of its people. The state had become a true reflection of America's growing heterogeneity, a blend of old-world traditions and new-world ambitions. But growth brought change, and challenges. Early versions of New York State Constitution limited voting rights to property owners and gave power to wealthy landholders and merchants. As the population diversified and democratic ideals spread, calls for reform grew louder. In the 1830s, tenant farmers in the Hudson Valley began to challenge the old system of large estates. Their campaign for land ownership symbolized a broader push toward democracy and equality. The Constitutional Convention of 1846 marked a turning point, expanding male suffrage and curbing the power of both the legislature and the governor. Through revolution, reform, and relentless growth, New York had transformed from a divided colony into a dynamic, democratic powerhouse, a state that would continue to define the American experience for centuries to come. The fight for equality and the rise of political power in New York. As the 19th century unfolded, New York became a driving force behind one of the most transformative social movements in American history, the fight for women's rights. The state played a central role in shaping the national debate over equality and suffrage. In 1848, the quiet town of Seneca Falls hosted a groundbreaking event, the first women's rights convention in the United States. Organized by activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, the convention produced the famous Declaration of Sentiments, a bold document demanding equal rights for women, including the right to vote. Later that same year, another major gathering took place in Rochester, followed by a third in Syracuse in 1852. These conventions cemented New York's place at the heart of the women's suffrage movement. Decades later, in 1894, during the state's constitutional convention, suffrage activists presented an astonishing 600,000 signatures petitioning for women's voting rights, a massive effort that showed the growing momentum of the movement. Yet, despite the groundswell of support, the proposal was rejected. It would take another 23 years of relentless activism before victory finally came. In 1917, New York granted women the right to vote, 3 years before the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. While social progress took center stage in some areas, political tensions deepened in others. The state's rapid growth gave rise to new divisions, none more enduring than the rivalry between New York City and upstate New York. The debate over home rule, the city's demand for greater self-governance, became a defining issue, symbolizing the clash between urban and rural priorities that still echoes through New York politics today. Amid this political evolution, a new power structure emerged in New York City. In the 1780s, a political organization known as Tammany Hall was founded to challenge efforts by wealthy revolutionary leaders to restrict voting rights. Over time, it transformed into one of the most powerful political machines in American history. By the mid-19th century, Irish-American politicians had taken control of Tammany Hall and the office of mayor. Their influence peaked under William Magyar Boss Tweed, who rose to power in 1868. Under his leadership, Tammany became both a source of social support for immigrants and a global symbol of political corruption. The image of Boss Tweed, the man who controlled votes, contracts, and even elections, became infamous worldwide. The contrast between Democratic-controlled New York City and Republican-dominated upstate New York fueled deep political divisions. Yet, Tammany's strength lay not only in its grip on politics but in its social services. At a time when government welfare systems barely existed, Tammany Hall provided food, jobs, and housing to thousands of new immigrants arriving in the city. That system of power began to crumble during the Great Depression of the 1930s, when the state and federal governments took over many of those social responsibilities, from Social Security to unemployment benefits and public welfare programs. As these reforms spread, Tammany's political influence gradually faded, marking the end of an era in New York's political history. Through reform and resistance, New York continued to evolve, balancing progress and corruption, equality and ambition, shaping not only its own destiny but also the story of democracy in America. Strengthening and rebuilding, New York's journey through challenge and renewal. The decades following World War II brought dramatic change to New York. Between the 1940s and 1980, the state expanded its social and educational services at an unprecedented rate. Public universities grew, infrastructure projects multiplied, and social programs reached millions. Yet, this progress came with a heavy cost. As manufacturing declined and industries moved elsewhere, New York's once mighty industrial base began to erode. The state, and especially New York City, faced mounting financial strain. By 1975, the city stood on the brink of bankruptcy, its future uncertain. However, through a mix of emergency state aid, federal support, and financial reforms, New York managed to pull back from the edge. It was a defining moment that tested the resilience of both the city and its people. In the final decades of the 20th century, strong leadership and strategic policy shifts began to turn things around. A series of governors and legislative leaders cut taxes, diversified the economy, and laid the groundwork for long-term growth. Wall Street once again became a global financial powerhouse, driving the city's recovery. Meanwhile, upstate regions like Corning and Rochester reinvented themselves through innovation and high technology, marking a new era of progress and prosperity. By the dawn of the 21st century, New York stood tall, confident, modern, and economically strong. But that sense of invincibility was shattered on September 11, 2001, when terrorist attacks destroyed the World Trade Center and claimed thousands of lives. The tragedy not only devastated the city's spirit, but also crippled its economy. Yet, in true New York fashion, the response was one of unity, courage, and rebuilding. The state and city joined forces to restore what had been lost, not just the skyline, but the confidence and determination that defined New York for centuries. Out of tragedy came renewal, as New Yorkers once again proved their unmatched ability to adapt, rebuild, and rise stronger than before. From the struggles of the colonial era to the triumphs and trials of modern times, New York history is a story of resilience, reinvention, and unbreakable spirit, a mirror of America itself. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of New York, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps History Love continue uncovering the stories that shaped our world. Stay tuned, there's always more history waiting to be discovered.